Greetings everyone, welcome to our Q&A session for August 2023. We get some really fantastic questions this month, and including the answers to just a few of them in this video. Hopefully they're things you've been thinking about too, or some things that can inspire you. Let's get right to it with question one. For the last few months, I have been seeing the word poppy all over the place, sometimes in reference to the plant, but also in other ways. A dog named Poppy, a perfume, artwork with the name in it, and many other times. If this happened to you, would you think that the plant was asking for you? This is a plant that I would likely have to work with in image form. Any thoughts? Absolutely. You know, at the end of the day, when in doubt, check it out, right? Nothing bad is going to happen if you chase down a plant and feel them out and sit with them and get to know them, and you're like, oh, you know, cool, I learned some things, but there's no magic there. Best case scenario, of course, is that that plant is reaching out to you intentionally, or that you have other helping spirits that are kind of aligning the path between you, which is oftentimes actually how it happens. So I always say that even if you only see a plant one time, but there's like a hit, right, a feeling, it's worth investigating. Where you're seeing it several times, the name popping up several times and imagery and all of that, I would say at that point it's worth planning, you know, a little 3-day dedication where you're meditating with that plant 3 days in a row, or 7 days, or whatever. Cracking open whatever herb books you have. You know, poppy, California poppy is one thing I think you're probably talking about. The other poppy, a little harder, you know, to find in herb books, but certainly no shortage of folklore and information online that you could read about, like you mentioned, and just kind of use study as a way to kind of warm the path and just see if you continue to get other hits. Poppy is, of course, such a cool ally and wrapped up in so much folklore. Demeter and Persephone being one of the things that I see when Poppy comes into people's life, is that mythos is generally relevant in one way or another, and a very cool plant. So yeah, you know, I always say if it happens 3 times, it's a ringer. But I've also, you know, experienced having a plant just show up and up and up and up and up, and I sit with them and there's some click or some aha, and that's kind of where it ends. And I've had quieter plants that, you know, I only saw something once or twice. I only got a little tug, but it was so deep that I was like, oh, this is worth following, and we ended up hitting it off. So when in doubt, check it out. It's always worth it. Plus, it's always cool to just learn about plants. So I think chances are you have a friend in the making there. Thank you. Fantastic question. Next question. Do you have an herbal ritual for the solar eclipse? All right. Or do you know of any pagan type ceremonies involved with it? I live in a town that will have the October 2023 and the April 2024 solar eclipse over me. Very cool. I don't know anything off the top of my head. I know that there's a lot of pretty firmly embedded ritual in India around solar eclipses. One that I remember participating in personally was wading out into water, you know, waist high, and doing sankalpa, doing resolve, as a way to mitigate any malefic influences from the eclipse. You know, I don't know if the lore is about some kind of drama between the moon and the sun, the moon kind of eclipsing the sun, and that's seen as some celestial drama, or, you know, it could be deeper into the mythology there of Rahu and Ketu, the north and south nodes of the moon being a little bit draconian in their energy sometimes. I'm not really sure what the root is, but so we know that at least in one expression of an Indo-European culture, there's something around an eclipse. For me, I would say it's an opportunity for protection, right? To break that down, and just kind of riffing what's on the top of my head, that you're kind of going through this moment of darkness at a time that should be light. So an invitation to do, you know, what do they usually last, like 15 minutes or something? a purification with incense, or a bath or something to be inspired, kind of what happens in a lot of places in India, or some prayer or whatever, to use that little window as a moment to really kind of protect oneself seems good. I do remember too, and I'm sure you could find some references online of people saying like you don't necessarily want to be out in it, right? When it happens, like you might want to be indoors or in a temple or a sacred space or in a sacred river or a sacred grove. So, again, just one perspective, not that I'm saying I think it's a misfortunate activity. It's just one of the things, but contemplating the relationship between moon and sun, and the personages of moon and sun, and experiencing darkness during the daytime, all of that could be an interesting segue into just doing a little ritual for yourself, that maybe you kindle a protection candle while the sun is covered, to bring a different kind of light into your life, something you're working on, or maybe using that darkness as a portal during the day to do things that maybe you normally do at night, like spirit work or something. So cool question, fun to think about. If I think of anything else now that I've read your question, I will send to you something, because this is very cool. Next up, could you discuss working with plants as amulets and talismans? All day long. And specifically what one may do differently when creating an amulet versus a talisman, and vice versa. It is my understanding an amulet provides protection and wards off that which would harm one, while talismans draw things to one which they desire, like prosperity, love, power, etc. Amulets push away, talismans draw near. If this is not correct, please comment on the difference. Any warnings about talismans? Can what we desire end up hurting us? Be careful what you wish for, sort of thing. So ways to put controls when crafting a talisman so we don't get the wealth we desire from the life insurance of a murdered child. Fair point. Lastly, differences in crafting amulets and talismans using plant versus other materials, as seems there should be a difference when using plant alloys versus other things like Eye of Newt, right? Which is probably a plant, by the way. Most of those old grimoire-based recipes where it's hair of a black dog, eye of newt, sand from a graveyard, they're actually all secreted names of plants. They're all plant materials hidden under, wart of a toad or whatever. So it's usually all plant-based. So I'll say this. Traditionally, yes, difference between amulet and talisman. Amulet is apotropaic, it wards. Talisman is invocative, it draws in. So you could break it down that way if that makes it easier in your practice. I find myself using them interchangeably, and then I hear myself doing it and I'm like, okay, that's not really proper, but so I appreciate the you clarifying this, because it is important. Something else that I think about, and this is maybe where it becomes a little more relevant in my practice, I feel like an amulet in plant spirit work is as is, right? So you are hanging a piece of bark around your neck. You are tucking a root into your pocket. You are putting some berries, dried berries, on an altar. The plant material itself is amuletic. Is that a word? It is now. To me, talisman implies a creative act. So sewing up an herb into a sachet, drawing a plant spirit sigil in an ink made from that plant, carving a fetish or an image from the wood of a tree that you're working with. You're adding your art to it. You're crafting it into something else. That's the big difference to me. Amulet, as is, the trees, the plants gift us amulets. Talisman, the meeting between the sorcerer and the plant spirit to create something third, right? A tertiary active point. So that's one thing. I am quite careful about what I ask for, especially from the plants, because they're so different from us, even though they really understand the human connection, especially some of them. Love is permissive, right? love is the law, and love is permissive. So when we say we give permission for wealth to happen, we give permission for wealth to happen. And like you said, that could come from a bajillion different angles, right? Our humans are brilliant. We're so smart, but our perspective is still finite. We can only conceive of a finite number of possibilities that wealth could come, whereas one of our plant allies or a deity or an ancestor could see maybe 10 times that many. And so the roads to manifesting our will are infinite, probably, right? So I don't stress too much about it, but I'm pretty careful about like how I say things and how I ask for things. I always throw the little insurance in there for the good of all, for my highest good, in harmony. And I tend to use the words that the plants have taught me. So the words that come up for me when I do plant spirit work, when I do spirit work in the green realm, in the world of the plant spirits, or with the deities that I work with, they tend to use verbiage that is not the verbiage that I use, but I try to adopt it. So for example, being a person in 2023, it would be my natural response to use the same words that you did: wealth, prosperity, abundance, riches, fortune. These are the words we use, but the plants have never used those words with me. Never. And I work close. My patron deity has, for one of his epithets and one of his symbols, an item that is quite literally the symbol of abundance, right? And the word that they have used over and over again throughout the years is the word plenty, and also the word enough or enoughness, right? A play on the word enough. So I've adopted this term plenty and this word enough, and people like, I say it because it's second nature to me now, and I see people kind of glaze over, and I realize, oh, I'm using a word that's outside of the word that we normally use, and that when I meditate on that term plenty, I realize there's insurance built into it, right? For safety. And so I'm so grateful that they give me a word like plenty. And the idea, quickly to wrap it up, plenty is you always have plenty. You always have enough. It's not a capitalistic, excessive, materialistic state of abundance or overabundance or wealth or hoarding. It's always having enough for what you want. So no matter what you want, you can have it because you have enough for it, right? But there's a humility, a groundedness to that term plenty, that term enough, that I feel like has a little more of an insurance on it than saying, I want to be rich and wealthy, and opening yourself up, like you mentioned, to like, how is that? Are you going to have to get hit by a car and do an insurance claim to get that money? No, I'd rather not do that. I actually had a mentor really early on in my work who, in trying to move her business from the trunk of her car into a restaurant, was really doing that kind of work and ended up getting hit by a car and got exactly the amount of money from that settlement that she needed to go from catering out of the trunk of her car into owning a restaurant, or starting a restaurant. And so she would always remind me, hey, don't get hit by a car. Don't put yourself in a situation where you have to get hit by a car to get your needs met. Like, that's not the way. So choose words that feel peaceful, that feel rooted, that feel aligned to harmony and nature. I know it sounds wooey, but there are words we use that when we really think about them, they don't line up. They feel excessive or forced or synthetic. So don't use those words, and a lot of you guys know I'm a huge etymology nerd. I love looking at the history of words and where they come from and the roots of them, and that helps me choose what I say. When in doubt, lean into the protection of your plant allies. Know that they have your back, and ask them to have your back. Give permission for that protection, and put a disclaimer on your stuff, for the good of all, with peace, with harm to none, whatever. People do that because it works, right? Feed your amulets and talismans. They are representatives of the plant spirits who gave them, and so they should be fed regularly at the full moons or at the solstices and equinox. Go through and give them, feed them, blow smoke for them, breath for them, drops of whiskey, whatever. They should be fed. Honor them. If you don't ever work with them anymore, release them back into the wild in a respectful and grateful way. I'm sure I missed some of this, but hopefully that's a helpful beginning. If I didn't, send me another question and we'll do a part 2 next month. Thank you. Good question. Let's do one more. Hi, Josh. I'd love to hear you discuss polytheism and syncretism in the Green Path some more. Not sure if this is Q&A or future course material. Both? Let's do both. I'll talk a little bit about it right now and probably do at least maybe a Friday class on this. So polytheism, easier to talk about. Syncretism, little hazier, but I'll try to just briefly drop some stuff on both. So for me, the plants teach polytheism, right? They show us that we are in a world filled with people, and that there are many, many different layers of being, many layers of reality that intersect and influence and relate to one another. And so for me, that concept of polytheism comes natural to this work, right? Just as I have to acknowledge that plants have their own layer of reality that they occupy. Of course, it overlaps with our own, but they're living their own life from their own perspective in what we call the green realm, or the woods, right? I have to acknowledge that because I've experienced it, and if that's true, it continues for animals and non-corporeal beings. I experience the personhood of plants all the time, which tells me that there are conscious, wise, engaged people who are not human, and there are many of them. So that requires me to step into that animist experience as well. And so for me, that trickles into the concept, I should say, because I want to be respectful that not everybody who does plant spirit work, and not even everybody who learns some of what they learned from me, is a polytheist, right? I am a hard polytheist, but not everybody is. So I try to use language that won't alienate people, but allows me to also speak my truth and what I do, because as I said, it is what it is. My experiences have also, made room for the fact that the monotheist concept doesn't work for me, and that the universe is filled with beings, and a lot of them are of the level that we would call deities or gods, and have that amount of influence and perspective and wisdom. I don't think any of them are omniscient or omnipotent. None of them are completely all-powerful, all-knowing everywhere. We still invoke our gods. We call them in, we invite them. The deities that I work with have specific areas within the cosmos of influence, and that tends to be where they focus. While I could bring any kinds of problems to them and they could help, their focus is on what they do and what they're about, and that's why they're gods, right? So, So polytheism for me and plant spirit work go hand in hand. It allows me to live in a universe filled with a diverse type of people that are not just humans, and it allows me to engage with non-human persons who have a perspective different than my own, ideally a bigger, more powerful one, right? That will help me out, because relationships, right? We're always going to consider what's in it for me. That's just the nature of things, and that's okay. So I'm not sure if that's the direction you wanted me to take, but there's that. And of course, the sheer number of deities in various traditions, even if we only looked at Indo-European traditions that are involved with, protectors of, guardians of, knowers of plant lore. So many, right? So many deities that are deities of the walled garden, deities of the wild wood, deities of herbalism, deities of agricultural cycles. So that's there too, which is an invitation to engage. Now, syncretism gets fuzzy because syncretism is the natural outcropping of animism. I consider myself an animist, somebody living with an animist perspective to the best of my ability in a culture that is not supportive of animism, right? We always have to like dial it in and remind ourselves that we're not the biggest or most important person in the room in nature, the room being the universe, right? So this is a tricky one, and this is where I think it deserves its own class. I will also put a link below to somebody who can talk about this with much more grace and clarity and intelligence than I ever will be able to, which is Rune Rasmussen. Rune, I will link to his channel below. It's very, very cool about syncretism. But syncretism is an outcropping of an animist practice. It is normal, it is natural, it's human nature, and it is part of animism. There's no way to do animism in a vacuum. Syncretism will happen. Syncretism is encouraged by our spirit allies. Where it gets tricky is when people step out of the lane of syncretism and into the lane of appropriation, right? Because it can look like a really thin line. So I try to be very, very careful about staying in my own lane, not appropriating, respecting the traditions, the mystery teachings, the asks of indigenous people and indigenous cultures and closed practices, and honestly even a bunch of open practices that I don't engage with, even though they're considered open. Hello, Hinduism, right? Because that just feels better for me, and I just haven't felt that. But from the syncretic angle, I can certainly look at other traditions, especially ones within the Indo-European sphere, to help me creatively patch holes in my own work, right, in my own tradition, or to see how people who have been relating to a plant since forever have been doing that relationship so that I can see if I can also relate to that plant. Again, staying in my lane, an example of this is that Salvia apiana, white sage, grows where I live. I have no relationship with that plant. When I walk by Salvia apiana, of course I have to touch and smell and revel in their beauty, because that is a plant that is just so incredible. But I just leave it there. I leave it at respecting and honoring, and I feel like I'm doing my part. So it can be tricky, and I'm sure that's not the direction that you wanted to go. But the reason I want to do a class on this at some point is for that syncretism is part of animism. It is part of plant spirit work. There are too many plants for anybody to know everything about, and it's our nature to encounter other cultures, other herbalists, other plant spirit workers, and want to soak up everything they know and talk about everything we know, and therein nourish and edify and strengthen one another's practice in a respectful way, right? And in a way that adds to and empowers and amplifies, not silences or shuts down or steals or judges, right? That's where the difference is. And sometimes it looks like the difference is in intent, and maybe it is, but it's also in like what you do with it, right? So very, very important to me. Rune Rasmussen, link below. This is stuff that you're interested in. He'll blow your mind. He's super cool. And polytheism, yes, all the gods. Only a few sit at my table. You know, I work with the leafy gods, the plant ones, the ones that like plants, because I like plants and I hang out with plants, and we have that in common. But I think it makes sense. So awesome question. Thank you for all the great questions this month, everybody. I really appreciate it. We open questions on Patreon for all tiers on the 20th of every month. You usually have 5 or 6 days to submit your questions. Some of them I respond to personally through text or privately. A bunch of them make it here, and then I post this video on the last day of the month for everybody to see what kinds of cool stuff we're talking about. So keep them coming. Write down questions that you have throughout the month, drop them on me on the 20th, and it gives us something cool to talk about. With that, I will send you out into the wild green world to do your thing. I'll see you next time with blessings of peace and plenty, right?